Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe. So in this video, this is going to be a part 2, and if you haven't watched the part 1 where I drafted the patterns, I'll leave a link in the description box below on where you can watch that video. So this is going to be a sewing tutorial, and I already have my fabric and I already have my patterns which I'm going to be cutting on my fabric. So let's get on right in the tutorial. So this is the fabric I'm going to be using. I really like the way it shines, and it's actually a bit thick, and it's also stretchy, but not too stretchy, but it has a one-way stretch, not both ways. But since it's not too stretchy, I'm going to be adding allowance. So here I'm cutting the front of my skirt pattern, and my fabric is on fold, and make sure the center front is on the folded part. Okay, I'm going to be notching my hip depth with my scissors, and this will enable me to join it to my hip for the back. So I'm now cutting the back pattern, and my fabric still on fold, but the center back is not going to be on the folded part because we're going to be adding a zip. So I've already added my allowance, so that's why I'm not adding allowance to the fabric. So I'll just keep this aside. Now I'm just going to be cutting my side front, my center back, and my side back, my center back, my back pattern, and my center front. So here we have 3 pattern sets, and I'm just going to be cutting this. And make sure that your center front is on the folded part, and we're going to be needing 4 pieces each for this, 2 for the lining and 2 for the main fabric. So here I'm just putting my 0.5 inches sewing allowance on that curvy area there where my under bust is, because I was unable to add it to my pattern. So at the side front I'm just adding 1.5 inch, and on the armhole I'm adding 0.5 inches sewing allowance. So I'll do the same thing for this other side, but if you have already added your allowance, this part is not really necessary. So after adding my allowance, so on the side back I'm also going to be adding 1.5 inches of sewing allowance, and on the armhole for the side back I did the same thing. So now I'm just going to take my scissors, and I'm going to be cutting this out. Okay, that was it. So next, make sure to notch your underbust, because this will help you when you're joining it to your center front. You can notch any other places, but I only notch my underbust, and that is okay for me. So I'm also going to take my center front and also notch my underbust, so you can notch any other parts like I said. Okay, we're done cutting this, and now we can keep this aside. Remember, you need 4 pieces of each. So now remember I said we need 4 pieces, so I'm now cutting another 2 pieces each for the lining part. Make sure to notch your underbust, so I'm just labeling this lining. So now remember we added a facing, so I'm just going to be cutting that facing out of my front pattern. So now the center front here I'm going to be placing it on fold, so I'm now going to keep this aside now, and I'm going to fold my cut off the facing for the back pattern too, because we also need this. Okay, now remember that you're going to place your fabric on fold, and you're going to need 2 pieces for the back and 1 piece for the front, but the center front of the front pattern is going to be on the folded part. So I'm just labeling this allowance so that we will not be confused. Okay, so I've went ahead to cut it, and this is it. So now we can go ahead to the next step. So next I'm just going to notch where my hip is, so that when I'm joining I will not be confused, because sometimes I get confused and join the zip part to the hip part. So I'm just notching so I know that okay, yes, this is my hip. Okay, now we're done. We'll just keep this aside and go to the next step. So now I'm just going to be cutting the sleeve, and this is very simple. You're just going to place your fabric on fold, because you need 2 pieces of the sleeve, and you're going to just spread it how wide you want it. But I made the lower part very wider than the upper part because I want to give it a kind of shape. So now I'm just redrawing that. After spreading it, I'm just redrawing and aligning it like so with using my chalk. So I'm just using my free hand and redrawing the upper part. I'll do the same thing for the lower part. Just use my free hand to redraw it to meet each end like so. And remember that I already have allowance on this my sleeve pattern, so I didn't add any allowance because I already have allowance. So now I'm just using my scissors to cut. And remember that we need 2 pieces of this. Okay, now we're done cutting, and look at the set. So now I think we can go ahead to the sewing part. So I went ahead to iron lining, S-stay, that's an interfacing. And interfacing I used was S-stay, and I added interfacing on I ironed interfacing on my lining part. So you can iron it both on your lining and fabric, your main fabric, but I just did this for my lining. So now here I have my main fabric, and I'm just going to make the right side of the side front face the right side of the center front, and making sure that the notches they meet. Remember that we notched the underbust, so I'm just going to make sure that they meet. I will just use my pin to hold that down, and I added 0.5 inches allowance to this curvy part here, so I'll be stitching with 0.5 inches sewing allowance. I'll do the same thing for the other side. Make the right side face the right side, make sure that the notches of the underbust they meet, and use my 0.5 inches allowance to sew. Okay, so first thing first, I sew from my underbust upwards, making sure that they align. Then I sew from my underbust downwards. So that's how I normally sew my bustiers. So now after sewing, you're just going to do the same thing for each side. So this is it, and sadly I'm not going to be padding this bustier. So next, you're just going to take your scissors, and you're just going to be notching those curvy parts. So yeah, I'm just notching, and you're going to be doing this notching on both sides, and make sure you also notch the underbust, very necessary. So after notching, this is how it looks, and I'm now going to be adding my back pattern to the front. So yeah, I have my back pattern, so I'm just taking that off and removing the pin, and I'm going to be placing the side back and on my side front. So yeah, I have my back, and I'm just going to make sure that the right sides face the right sides like so, and I'm going to be using the 1.5 inches sewing allowance to stitch. So I'll now do the same thing on both sides. Make sure the right side face right sides, and then stitch. So after stitching, this is how it looks, and I kind of like how it's coming out, and I really like this fabric. So you can just go ahead and use your pressing iron to press this flat, your seam allowance. So we're just going to do the same thing, basically the same thing for your lining, so I'm not going to go through this again. So you just do the same thing for your lining. Okay, I did the same thing for my lining, and this is how it looks. So make sure you also notch. So so make sure you also notch. I've already gone ahead to notch it, then use your iron to press your seam allowances down. Okay, we are making progress. Okay, so next I have my skirt part, and this is the front, and I'm just going to bring the back and make sure that the hip of the back lay on the hip of the front, joining the hips together, right side facing right sides. And remember that we notched the hip depth, so I'm just going to be making sure that the notches meet so that they can be equal. And I'm just going to do this on both sides. This is my other back piece. Remember that we needed 2 pieces of the back, and I'm just going to be sewing using the 1.5 inches allowance I added to my hip. Okay, gone ahead to join it, and this is how it's looking. So next we're just going to be fixing a zip. So I assume that we all know how to fix a zip, but there's there are tons of tutorials on how to fix zip on YouTube. So this is the zip. Okay, so now I just got ahead to mark where I want my loops at the back to be, and I used 2 inches spacing each. So after using 2 inches, I think 2 inches to 1.5, I can't really remember, but after spacing it and putting where I wanted the loops to be, I went ahead to make a kind of strap, and I made my strap 2.5 inches wide. It's supposed to be 2 inches wide, but remember that we added 0.5 inches to the side back, so I added the 0.5 inches, making it 2.5 inches wide. So now I'm just using my scissors and cutting. So now I'm just going to turn the loop like this, making it giving it that kind of loopy shape, and I'm just going to be placing it on where I marked, because that's where I want my loops to be. And you don't have to, any amount of loops you want to add, you can add it. So I think I did 6 inches on both sides, making it 12. So I'll just use my pin and hold it down. Okay, so you just use a basting stitch to stitch this down. Okay, remember that you have to do this on both sides, and we are done adding the loops. So the next step, we're going to be taking our lining, and we're going to make sure that the right side of the lining faces the right side of your main fabric, and we're just going to be using this to turn our main fabric. So you have to make sure the seam allowances meet. So yeah, I'm just making sure the seam allowance at the top meet, and I'm just going to use my pin to hold this down. I'll do the same thing for the other side, make sure that the seam allowances meet, and use my pin to hold it down. So I'm now going to use my 0.5 inches allowance I used to sew. Make sure not to sew the armhole, that's not really necessary. So I'm now going to also sew the side back using 0.5 inches allowances, just sew on both sides. Okay, so I'll take this to my machine and do that. So I've done it. So make sure to notch the upper part, and I'm not going to be stop stitching this because the fabric is kind of thick, so I don't really think that was going to be a good idea. I didn't bother to try it out, so I just made sure that I notched it very well so that the lining is not really going to show when I flip it. Okay, also make sure to notch where your loops are so that it will not bulge. So this is it. So I'm just turning it inside out. So this is how it looks after turning with my lining. I can say that I actually love the shape, and it's not that bad. It's okay. I actually like how this is going. So this is it, and we're going to be working on the facing now. So this is my front and back facing, and this is the center front. Remember that we cut that on fold, and we needed 2 pieces for the center, the back. So I'm now going to be removing the pattern paper from the fabric. So this is my front, and remember that we notched the hip, so that's where our hip is going to be. So you just make the hip face the hip, just like how we join our skirt. So make sure that the right side faces the right side, making sure that the hip is facing the hip, and you do the same thing for the other side. Make sure that the right side faces the right side. So you're not going to use the 1.5 inches sewing allowance or any allowance that you added to stitch that down. So what I like to do before adding the facing is I like to join my skirt to my bodice, my upper bodice. So first I'll make sure that the right side faces the right side, and the seams, that's the side seam of my skirt and the side seam of my bodice, they meet, and I'll just pin that down, and I'll make sure they meet at the other side. But if you notice that yours is not equal, that's not a problem. Maybe your bodice, your waist of your bodice or the waist of your skirt is too wide, so you're just going to hold the waist and try again. So it happens to me, so don't be scared. So now you're just going to after joining it, you're just going to use a basting stitch to hold this down. Maybe use 0.25 inches just to hold it down. So you're just going to sew to the end like so. Okay, so this is it after joining. So I'm just going to show you how to fix the facing. So I'll make sure that the right side face the right side like this. So this is it, and I'll make sure I'll just take my facing and make sure the right side face the my lining part. So if you just watch the video, you will see what I'm doing. So now I'm just going to make sure the side seam of my bodice and the side seam of my facing they meet, just so that it can be equal. Just making sure I'm pinning that down. So after making sure that the side seam meets, I'm just going to be sewing using 0.5 inches allowance. So I'm just going to be sewing round. So one trick is when you get to that zipper part, you're just making sure the right side face the right side, then you sew to the, when you get to the zipper part, make sure that you bring out the zipper like this, place your facing on it, and you're just going to sew down and very, very close to the zipper tooth, and you do that for both sides. So like I said, when you're just going to sew using 0.5 inches, so I'm just sewing down. And when you now get to that zipper part, make sure you look at the zipper part and the right side facing the right side. Then you're just going to sew very, very, very close, okay, very close as you can to the zipper teeth. Don't sew the zipper, I didn't say you should sew the zipper, but just sew very close to the zipper teeth or whatever they call it. So now I'm just removing the excess of my zipper so that it's not going to budge when I turn it over. Okay, so this is how it looks after putting the facing, and I can say that it's not that bad. I actually like how it's looking, and I for one like this fabric. It was very easy to use, and this is the inside, and I'm just showing you how it looks. Okay, there's the front. Okay, so now let's start with our sleeve. So this is my sleeve, and I've already gone ahead to hem the bottom part using the 2 inches hemming allowance that I added. So now remember that the two ends are open, so I'm just going to be passing an elastic, and for the elastic I use my wrist measurement and I minus 2 inches from my wrist measurement because I wanted it to be very tight. You can use whatever measurement. If you want the sleeve to stop at your elbow, that's the measurement you're going to be using. So now I'm just going to be passing my elastic through that hole. Make sure to, when you get to the end, you just stitch, but since I'm just showing you guys how to do it, I'm just going to be using my pin to hold this down. If you don't stitch this, it might pull and you will have to start over again. So I'm just using my pin to hold this down, and I'm now going to be passing the elastic through the hole till I get to the other end. So when you get to the other end, just make sure to stop stitch that, and this is how it looks. So now we're just going to be joining the side, making the right side face the right side. You're just going to be using your seam allowances that you added to join this side, and for me I added 1 inch seam allowance. Okay, after doing that, you're just going to join this to the front now. So here I have the armhole for my front, and I'm just going to take my sleeve, and I'm going to make sure this, you can first use your overlocker to overlock the top, but I don't have an overlocker, so I'm just going to be doing it like that. So you just make your seam meet your seam like so, and I'm just going to pin that down. I remember that I added 0.5 inches for my armhole, so I'll just use 0.5 inches to sew. Okay, after sewing, I'm just going to flip this down, and I'm just going to sew this round using 0.5 inches. So I'll just sew round. Okay, remember that when you sew round, you have to leave two ends open because that's where you're going to be passing your elastic through. So mine is a bit rough because I don't have an overlocker or zigzag machine that can make a zigzag, but that's okay. But so for the elastic, I didn't use any calculation for the length. I'm just going to pass it through till I'm okay with how tight it is. So now I'm just passing it through from one of the open end I made, and I brought it out from the other open end that I made. So now I'm just going to use my machine, and I'm going to stop stitch and close the open ends that I made so that I can pass my elastic. So this is it, guys. This is how the sleeve is looking. So you're just going to do the same thing for the other part of your sleeve, exactly the same thing, and then you're done. Okay guys, I'm finally done with this, and I'm just going to be adding lacing to the back. So guys, this is the final look. You can actually wear this sleeve two ways. It can be an off shoulder. I remember when I posted part 1, I said I didn't know what to do with the back, whether I should make a lacing or bag one. So I bought one, and this is how it looks. To those of you that stuck with me to the end of this video, I want to say thank you, and thank you guys for watching this tutorial video. See you next time.